Oh my goodness, you guys are going to be, well, I don't know if you're going to have as much fun. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to laugh, we're going to cry, we're going to just, you'll get a little glimpse into this beautiful relationship that my dear, dear friend Shauna and I have. And I'm so excited that she's on the podcast today. And gosh, this is just such a gift. To watch Shauna over the years navigate a cancer diagnosis, navigate the loss of a child, and now step into this beautiful role of God using her story and God just taking what she's walked through and her being this obedient vessel to give hope to so many people. And that's why I wanted her to be on, not just because it's an excuse for us to hang out on Zoom and talk, but because I think every single person can walk away after just 5 minutes of a conversation with Shauna and feel hope and feel just this wisdom that she has. And so you guys are in for a treat. Shauna, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh my gosh, I'm crying already.
Oh, you can't start yet.
Not a good party till someone cries.
It's true. It's really true. Especially around
so
us.
much for having me. I love you so much as a friend, and you've been such just someone I've looked up to for years and learned a lot from. And I'm so blessed to be here and spend this time with you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, I would love you to share your story. I want you to share why you're here right now, why you have this beautiful book called Even If, and just tell us a little bit about your journey in the last few years.
Yeah, gosh. Okay, so really, I was a stay-at-home mom with 4 kids. I had a small jewelry company. I was happy one day, and the next day, I thought my toddler was teething. My husband's a firefighter. We live in Hawaii, and we had 4 kids. We had 3 and 4 years, and then Trucker was 4 years behind him. Trucker was our baby. So it wasn't it wasn't a new rodeo show. Like my kids got fevers, my kids teethed. I felt like they come out of your body and they start teething. And so my youngest, my baby of 4, he was 19 months old at the time, he started getting fevers. And so I would give him Tylenol and they would go away, and he was cutting molars. So I didn't really think anything of it. And it wasn't until he started getting really lethargic and he would just like follow me around and lay on the floor and look at me. He just wanted me to hold him all the time. And the fevers were kind of persisting. And it was probably a couple weeks in where I would give him Tylenol. They would go away for a couple days. They would come back. And I dropped my big kids off at school one day and stopped by my mom's. And my mom started feeling around in his abdomen, and she felt this really hard lump. And she's like, honey, come feel this. And I thought I was touching his ribs. It was so hard, but his ribs were 2 inches above. And I was like, that's not good. So we went straight to the doctor. And I guess I just kept thinking the whole time that it was some sort of weird stomach infection and we would just get antibiotics and we would just get to go home. But in reality, the doctor knew something was wrong right away. At the time, also, Trucker had like a little black eye, which I had no idea, but that is a sign of neuroblastoma because it's a neurological cancer. And so she was like, how did he get his black eye? And I said, that's a great question, because he was a bruiser. He had 2 older brothers and an older sister. And at the time they were 5, 6, and 8. And so, but there wasn't a black eye is a big bump. Like that would have been a big cry, right? But there was nothing like that. So I was like, I don't actually know how he got that black eye, which is super strange, which to the doctor clued her in. And so they sent us to another clinic for more tests. And I honestly, from that day forward, they were like, okay, he needs more tests. You have to go to Oahu. It's a different island where they specialize in kids. And no one was even talking cancer. They're like, he can't even fly. His hemoglobin is so low. You need to go to the hospital right now and get a blood transfusion. And I remember at the time thinking, blood transfusion, like having someone else's blood put in my baby, like that felt like a really big deal. And it was, right? Because it's all relative up until that point. He'd barely even been to the doctor. And so we, from that time that we found the lump in his belly at my mom's until we ended up ever even going home. Like the next day, we were at the hospital that night getting a blood transfusion, flew to Oahu the next day, and it was literally months until we were able to even come home. And I remember sitting in the doctor's office, uh, and my husband's like, they're going to send in an oncologist, a pediatric oncologist. I was like, what's an oncologist? I didn't even know, which seems so silly now, but until you have an experience where you need to know, you don't know. And so, yeah, my husband was like, that's a cancer doctor. And I was like, what? So just so heavy and so hard. And I feel like at every crossroads where the doctor was like, okay, he most likely has these two cancers, Wilms or neuroblastoma. Pray for Wilms because there's, the treatment's not as aggressive and there's a lot higher survival rate. It was like at every crossroads where it could be this or this, we had the worst. So we had stage 4 neuroblastoma, which meant that it had spread to all 4 quadrants of his abdomen. His original tumor had started on his adrenal gland, and then it also metastasized to his bones and his bone marrow. So right from the get-go, he was given a 30% chance of survival. And if you've never dealt with cancer, when you get a diagnosis like that, you're learning a whole new language.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a doctor tell you that your 19-month-old baby has a 30% chance to live, not for his life, for 5 years, guys, that's a big reality check.
Ugh.
It's a gut wrenching, heartbreaking.
And when you don't, like you said, I think walking into a diagnosis, we were the same when they said oncology floor, we were like, what does that mean? But I think with kids, unless you knew of a kid that had cancer, it doesn't seem possible. It seems like,
No.
wait, what? This happens to old people, not
Yes.
kids. And then a 30% chance.
Yeah. To live for 5 years, not even to live for life. I was like, for 5 years?
Yeah.
What? And
And
then,
no, go ahead.
yeah, no, I just, and then it's like you go into total shock, right? I go from one day just like being a stay-at-home mom, like loving my life, living in the country, to, well, all of a sudden I'm living at the hospital talking chemotherapy, pediatric oncologists that my baby might live for 5 years after going through. I just remember the doctor listing it out like, these are all the things that are going to happen to you. Just kind of matter of factly. He was very kind and he's a wonderful man. I love that oncologist, but I just remember like his whole face was blur as he's like, so and so multiple rounds of high dose chemo, hospitalized, high dose chemo, life threatening abdominal surgery, multiple rounds of radiation, like, and then, that's if things are going well. If
Right.
things aren't going well, there's even more extreme things. And I just remember being like, no, 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 thank you. Do I have other options? I don't want to do
Yeah.
anything with my baby. He couldn't even talk.
Right.
So,
And I think it's important to say that a lot of people don't realize you don't have other options. As a child, if you're under 18, you're required to go through conventional therapy. They don't allow you to get a second opinion in Germany from a, alternative doctor, even if their specialty was neuroblastoma and pediatrics. It's against the law in the United States. And I say that just because I think it's important to understand, but I also think until, like Shauna said, you've been in this situation, it is terrifying. It's terrifying. And you don't know who to trust. You don't know what to do. And at that point, it's paralyzing. You're like, I don't, like you said, the doctor's face was a blur and you're just kind of numbly like putting one foot in front of the other. Like, I don't know what up from down is at this point. I just know that
yeah,
I want my baby to live.
you just go into shock. You
Yeah.
do. And then you go into like super mom mode, like doing everything you can. So for me, what that looked like was, okay, well, I don't have options. We're going to do this treatment. How can I best support his body alongside treatment? So, I started researching, we called ourselves momcologists
Yeah.
because what wouldn't you do? You would do anything, right? So for our family, that looked like, essential oils and detoxing as best we could. I mean, he was a baby and I had really little knowledge. So on top of, being overwhelmed in pediatric oncology, you're also overwhelmed with the whole
Yeah.
natural
Oh my
side of how
gosh.
you can support him.
And
So we
people are
did
sending you like, oh, have you heard about
everything.
this supplement? And you're like, no, I haven't, but gosh, like this is so overwhelming.
It's so overwhelming. It really, really is. But we did, I had a friend who was a naturopathic doctor at the time, and she hooked me up with a naturopathic oncologist. And so we had him on supplements right away. And he was doing high dose vitamin C drip. Like we would literally go from the oncology ward to the naturopath and do vitamin C drip right from the beginning. And so we just did the best that we could with what we had and feeding him supplements and all the things. But it is like very, very, very overwhelming. Our story, even went a little bit farther because we ended up getting treatment through my research. I found that they specialize in neuroblastoma in New York City. There's at Sloan Kettering. And so we did a consult with them and we found that they did things a little differently there, which if you've ever had a cancer diagnosis or anyone that you've loved has a cancer diagnosis, you really just feel like a number. You're like,
Mhm.
well, here's your cancer diagnosis, stage 4 neuroblastoma. Well, here's your treatment plan. Here's what you do if it works. Here's what you do if it doesn't work. I'm like, well, you're not taking into account all of the other things like your diet, your lifestyle, your genetics. Like you just really feel like a number and it's really discouraging. And so when I called Sloan Kettering, I was calling I was calling hospitals all over the nation to see if everybody did the same thing for his type of cancer. And I found that Sloan Kettering, first of all, they had 5 doctors just for neuroblastoma. And I was like, whoa, we need to go there. Like that's all they're doing. And they did do things a little bit differently. They had some of the same protocols, yes, but I did feel like it was a little more personalized. And I was like, I don't care how we're going to go there or how we're going to pay for it. It's just that's where we need to go for treatment, which was also a big, hard choice for our family because my
So
husband and
hard.
my other kids stayed in Hawaii. So, um, for a year and a half, basically, Trucker and I lived in New York City, and we came home when we could, which was super exhausting because it's a day travel both ways. So even if we got 5 days off, I was like, we're going. We just needed to be with our family as much as we could. And Joshua and my other 3 kids came out to New York whenever they could, but um, after a year and a half of this specialized treatment, all kinds of life threatening things. Like he had an abdominal surgery. They literally cut his body in half, like from his belly around to his back. And I remember the doctor in the pre op, it was a 10-hour surgery. And he was like, his main tumor is wrapped around his aorta. So even nicking his aorta during surgery could cause him to bleed to death. Like
Oh
it's a
my gosh.
big surgery, 10 hours. So, he had multiple surgeries. He had, multiple more rounds of chemo. We did experimental, a bunch of different things, immunotherapy. We spun my blood to see if it would help his immune system. And gosh, what else did we do? Then he relapsed in his brain, which is really common with neuroblastoma and the type of neuroblastoma that he had, which was another form called emic amplified, which just made his already aggressive cancer even more aggressive. And it's common in these emic amplified kids to relapse in the brain. And so he relapsed in the brain, which got him his first brain surgery. I mean, just every time the little guy, had something, it just was bad for him. It just was never like what we had hoped. So I know this sounds really doom and gloom, and it is. And that part of our story is really hard. But I feel like what this cancer diagnosis did for us as a family was gave us this perspective of fragility of life. And we enjoyed the shit out of our time together.
Mhm. Totally.
We really did. And so this is the hard part of our story is like the cancer diagnosis. But you know what? Every time he wasn't in the hospital, we did fun things. We were at Central Park every day. And my husband is a firefighter in Maui. I mentioned that. But we ended up just getting adopted by the FDNY, total chance. But we stumbled upon a captain on the street corner one day who just held out his arms like he'd known Trucker his whole life. And Trucker was barely even talking then. He was 2, but his eyes like lit up, like, oh, he's here for me. And yeah, it's just really special. We formed these relationships, and the FDNY ended up swearing him in as an honorary firefighter. And we had like the sweetest relationship with the FDNY, which is like just a pure gold part of our story. If we had an afternoon off, we were having firefighter mac and cheese at the firehouse, and they would, they cooked lunch for him, and they brought us food to the hospital. If he had a big hospital day, they would call me and be like, hey, we're on a run. We're right by the hospital. Can we stop by the front and see our boy? And so he just became one of the boys. And so just kind of kept us going, and actually when Trucker passed away, 24 of those firefighters flew out to Maui, and Trucker had full honors as their fallen hero at his funeral. It was so beautiful. I mean, it was really epic.
So amazing.
So
It's what you said too about like seeing the good in humanity when you're navigating something like that, and just seeing people come forward and put their arms out and love you. It just gives you hope again. But I think it's
yes,
important to make time to look for that and to see that. And like you
yes,
said, you would never wish any of this on anybody, but there is something about a diagnosis that gives you a different perspective. And it
yes,
reminds you of the fragility of life, and it allows you to live in the moment and just soak up every bit of good. Like that one flower you would normally walk by and not even think about. You're like, look how beautiful that is. Let's smell it.
yes,
Let's acknowledge
yeah,
this.
yes. And I've actually lost 2 friends this recently in the last several months. And I've just been reflecting on this idea of like, death is so hard as a human, right? I believe that we were created with eternity in our hearts, and death is so confusing. And I think why it's so confusing is it's the finality in this life, right? Like I actually had a friend who died yesterday, which is like so heavy on my heart, of course. But I read through all our old text messages, and I it's like the finality, how it feels in this life. It's like you just want one more. You want one more moment. You want one more photo in your phone. You want one more text messages. And when you can't ever have those, I want one more memory with my son. Like when people send me pictures of Trucker that I haven't seen before, that's the closest thing that I have as a mom to a new memory with him. And that's what's so hard about death for us in our humanity, is that it's so final in this life, right? It's like there's no more one mores. You get what you get.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's really, really hard. But what I think, and my whole heart, and what I want people to know is that even if that's the title of my book, even if the worst thing happens to you that you could ever imagine in your whole entire life, because it happened to me, you will still have joy. You will still have joy. Life is still beautiful. It's sad, it's complicated, it can be really, really hard, but it's also still beautiful. And I think that what's important for people to know is that when really shitty things happen, you have a choice in how you move forward. I think a lot of people choose to live in this state of having a pity party.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to confuse that. Like grief is a whole thing, and and grief is important, and it's relevant, and it's part of the process. And grief and a pity party are different things.
Mm-hmm.
So you can grieve and feel all of the emotions that come with grief, and all of the emotions that we have in our humanness are normal. It's just not staying stuck there. That's when it becomes a pity party.
Yeah. You said
So I,
something before, and I just thought I think it was actually my father-in-law passed. And maybe I've heard it from you before, and I believe you mentioned it in your book, the idea of the backpack.
yeah,
And I think sometimes, and I want you to share what that concept is, but when you give yourself permission to feel all the feels, but then, like you said, pick yourself up and move forward, and also give yourself permission to have a day where you don't feel bad. So will you tell
mhm.
us a little bit about this idea of the backpack?
Yeah, I have a whole chapter in my book called The Grief Backpack. So the best way I could to explain it to people when I was grieving after Trucker had passed was that it's like when someone you love dies, especially when it's someone in your immediate everyday, right? Because I've unfortunately had a lot of loss in my family. I've lost my brother, I lost my stepdad, who was like my father growing up. Last fall, I lost my dad. And all of those deaths are hard. It's still a loss and you still feel it. But when it's like someone in your immediate family, I imagine it would be similar with a husband or one of your children, which is just the most unnatural thing in the whole world. I think that learning to live in your life minus one of those people is one of the hardest things that we'll have to do in this life. It is so hard.
And
And
you're reminded
grief,
of it every day when you sit down at the table. And I remember you saying this when I've been out there, like, we're always missing one. You said once you look at his towel rack. His towel rack is still there, but it's just this, like you said, a constant reminder.
yeah, I still have his toothbrush in my toothbrush holder. I'll probably never throw it away. It's just a reminder that he lived,
Yeah.
right? I lost my train of thought.
Sorry. Grief in the backpack. You were
Oh yeah,
just
the grief backpack. So the best way that I could describe it, I think that would make sense to people who haven't navigated this level of grief, is that someone dies and there's this like gaping hole in your life, and you get this backpack, and it's a grief backpack. And some days it's like there's 50 bricks in it. It's just really heavy. You just feel heavy, your limbs feel heavy, your body feels heavy, and it's just harder to navigate emotions, people, real life, adulting, right? Adulting is hard, even if you don't have grief. If we're
literally.
honest here, if we're honest here. But when you have a grief backpack and it's heavy, everything is just really hard. But your grief backpack won't always feel like it has 50 bricks in it. Some days it'll just feel like it has one. And although you never get to take the backpack off, like when someone dies, your backpack's it's stuck to you. It's just a part of you now. And grief, it's the same as like grief is just a part of me, but it's not always heavy.
Hmm.
Some days there's only one brick and I can still navigate all the things in life. And, it's taken me a long time to get to this point of where I'm at in my journey too. He died in 2017. So it's been almost 6 years. And now I can talk about all of the things and the emotions and all the things most of the time without crying. And I'm a self-proclaimed professional
Professional
public
crier.
crier. That was a
But you're so
mouthful.
cute when you do it. You're not an ugly crier. There's a reason that God gave you that ability.
I don't know about that. What I did learn to do was like instead of like stuffing it and being like, I really want to cry right now. And now I just announce it. I'm like, I'm gonna cry. And then I just cry. And then here's the thing though, that if you're allowing yourself to feel the broad spectrum of emotions, is like Susan said in the beginning, we're gonna cry, we're gonna laugh, because that's just what we do, and that's just a normal part of life. And if you know me on any sort of level, I've probably made you cry and then we've laughed, because that's just life,
And you know
right?
what though? That is the perfect illustration too of who you are, but I think who we were all created to be. And when we stuff those emotions and we don't feel the feels and we don't give ourselves permission to stay in bed because the backpack feels like 150 pounds that we can't bear to carry. We don't
Yeah.
give ourselves permission to feel that. And then at the same time, we don't give ourselves permission to feel that it's super light and you almost feel guilty. And I've talked to you so many days over the last 6 years of your transparency, I believe, has allowed you to serve so many people because you've been
Mm.
able to healthily begin healing, and your heart will never be whole. It won't ever be healed. But because you've been transparent, and I'll talk to you and you'll say, today's hard. Like, or I have to shut down this week. This week is really hard. And you give yourself permission to be there. And then the next week
Yeah.
you can move forward. And so many people just stop that process.
Mm-hmm. I know. I know. It's really hard. And you have to choose not to stay there, right? It's a
Yes, right.
choice. So I talk about this. I think it's a chapter in my book. I haven't looked at my book in a while, but cultivating gratitude. I put together a journal. I can't remember if I made it a chapter. It is a chapter, Cultivating Gratitude. So it's this idea of when you are cultivating gratitude. So cultivate actually means to make something better. So when you're cultivating gratitude in your life, I believe that you also cultivate joy. To me, gratitude and joy are they go they're together. They're like bread and butter. So I think that even when you're in that slump and your grief backpack is really, really heavy, if you can just make yourself cultivate things you're grateful for, we all have things we're grateful for, even on our darkest days. Like we just do, you know? So even if you just, start writing down or thinking in your head or praying and thanking God for like little things in your life, like, I don't know, that we have clean running water,
Yeah.
right? That's more than, like, I don't know the percentage, but more than most of the world, right?
Yeah.
We have clean running water. We have toilets. Do you know what a gift that is?
Hmm.
It's a
Yeah.
gift if you don't have a
I've pooped in
toilet.
a hole before. I've pooped in a hole in the jungle. So yes.
Me too. Exactly. It's a gift. Little things. It could be big things. My husband, he has a job that he can go to work every day, that I have a good relationship with my kids. Like once you start cultivating
Yes.
gratitude, it will stir up joy in your heart. And to me, this is the key to not staying stuck in those hard moments, because we all have things that we can be grateful for, every single one of us. Even if it's not a toilet or running water, there's still things, it's like, but you have
That's
to
true.
choose to cultivate that. You have to choose to cultivate that daily, because otherwise it's real easy to stay stuck in the negative spiral down. And that's when you start going into a pity party. And I think that, part of me writing this book was, for years, I had people telling me, you need to talk about grief more. And I was like, no, I don't. No, I don't. I'm not talking
Yep.
about grief.
You said
I was
that
like,
all the time.
all the time. People would say, "Oh, you have such a unique perspective," and I would be like, "I just don't want to be known as a grief expert. No, I'm not going to talk about grief." Something shifted in me this year. I always say that God talks to me uh, when I run, when I'm working out, but really when I run, because there's just no distractions. It's like me in the road, and I talk to God when I run. I don't listen to music. So anyway, I I really felt it was after the 5th anniversary of Trucker passing, and I went on a run last year. And by the time I got home, it was like a 6-mile run. It wasn't like super long, but it wasn't super short. I had this whole blog post wrote in my mind about grief. And I walked in the door and I was like, the kids started, the family, all the things started happening. Mom, mom, mom. And I was like, don't talk to me. I gotta get this out of my head. So I went into the room and I just like wrote it all out. And whatever, 5 hours later, I posted it on my website. I just got the most incredible feedback from it, and it felt good. Not like for me, it felt good. I mean, to me, but it felt good that my words and my experience could help other people navigate their own grief journey, because we are all going to deal with death at some point in our life. And
Yeah.
so I was like, oh, I was like, okay, that kind of felt good, God. Okay, what do you got? Let's go for another
I'm
run.
open now. But you're
And
not the grief expert. You're the expert in finding joy in the midst of suffering and choosing God, even if, and choosing to find joy, even if, and choosing to find the good, even if. Like that's significantly different than being a grief expert, you know?
I know, I just couldn't see it. And so it was really cool, because so I wrote that blog post and I was like, okay, God, I'm listening. And at the time I was writing in my mind, and I still want to do this. I'm still writing this. It just hasn't happened yet. It got put on the back burner to write a book, but I wanted to name my retreats What If. So what if you owned your story, and what if you used your story to find purpose and help other people? And God was like, that's so good, but let's start with you. And I was like, I don't want to start with me. It's so hard. And of course I should start with me. Like, how's my heart to help people own their stories, right? I was like,
Right. You
you
can't.
own your story. I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, so then I write this blog post and I wanted to name my retreats What If, and then God's like, it's so good. You're gonna help so many people. I'm not crazy. Like I don't have a burning bush in my backyard. It's just the whisper on my heart. Okay. When I say that I heard God say to me, that's what I mean. I don't mean like, I'm not a crazy
Hello,
person.
Shauna.
Yeah. Hello, burning bush. But so I felt him, just the whisper in my heart, like, it's so great that you want to help people and you want to have these retreats named What If, but you are actually going to write a book and it's going to be called Even If. And I was like, oh, I like it. It's good. And so really that's how it all started. And really the whisper on my heart from God was, you're not going to be known as a grief expert, you're going to be known as a hope giver.
Hmm.
Because even if life can still be beautiful, even if, and you can apply that to, oh my gosh, so many things. And I know most people won't be able to understand, and I pray that they don't ever, the heartache of losing a child, especially losing a child to pediatric cancer. But oh my gosh, heartache is so relative, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
people going through a divorce, going through the death of a spouse, the death of a parent, name it. There's so many things. The loss of a job, the loss of a career. The last couple of years has been so crazy. The loss of your home. I mean, grief can apply to so many things, and
Yeah.
heartache and pain and hardship can apply to anything. And I think that the principles in my book is, about loss and grief, but it can be applied to any part of our life.
Absolutely.
And really, at the end of the day, we have a choice. You have a choice in how you move forward. Only you, right?
Yeah.
Pity party or find purpose in your pain and help other people, because I think at the core of our human existence, we want connection. We want to know that we're loved, and we want to know that we're heard, or maybe that somebody else has been through even a tiny bit of what we've been through. And
And I
there's some
think
peace there.
feeling needed. I think feeling needed
Yes.
is this innate thing in us. And it's when you are navigating a situation, like you said, the grief, whether it's a relationship or a job or a loss, and you can take that energy and feel needed by somebody else because you're choosing to serve, that is
Yes.
a powerful aspect of healing and being able
Yes.
to see joy or choose joy and give people hope at the same time.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
Oh, man, you are just like, I just think, I don't know. You are one of the people that I'm inspired every single day.
Hmm.
Every every time that I hear somebody navigating loss, I'm always like, oh, you got to talk to Shauna. Don't worry, I don't give your phone number out. I don't. Only a couple times, only a times. But I love
Give it
how,
to our website.
yeah, it's on my
My phone
Instagram,
number. Yeah.
Shauna Dukes' personal phone number. So good. But I
Oh
just
gosh.
am so thankful that you are obedient to the whisper in your heart and that you have chosen in the midst of a situation that really you didn't have to. You didn't have to write a book. You didn't have to show up for other people. You don't have to sit in conversation with others and pour your heart out and giving them hope. And you do. And it's such a gift. And I'm actually really blessed that that I get to call you one of my best friends. And that
Oh, I'm
everybody
so blessed
listening
by you
today,
too.
it's a little glimpse into your amazingness and your good laugh. They can't see your good hair because it's an audio podcast, but she has really good hair too. Well, don't worry. We'll link to her Instagram and her website and you'll see her good hair.
I do have really good hair. Just don't look at my toes, right? You can't have it all.
No, you can't. Listen, fat toes, good hair. It's
I did nail it in the good hair department though, for sure. I know. I'm super blessed.
so good. Okay, so
Aw.
before we go, I want to ask you, what is something that's inspiring you right now? It could be a song, it could be a recipe, it could be a book, it could be anything.
Ooh. Well, yesterday on repeat was that song you introduced me to actually, which is, I'm gonna forget the name. How does it go? It's a worship song. And she played only half the song on piano, and you did it in a reel one time. And then they,
Oh, I pray for your healing.
yes, I pray for
Oh.
your healing. That was on repeat yesterday. I don't know if that's as much inspiring as it was just like soul for me, because I knew that my friend was on life support and her family was pulling the plug yesterday. So um on repeat. What is inspiring me in my life right now? I just finished a book. I gave it to Joshua, or else I would show you what it looked like, but it's called The 12-Hour Walk.
Oh,
And
yes, I've heard you've told me about this.
so good. So, so good. It's this guy, Colin O'Brady. If you guys don't know who he is, go look him up. But I heard a podcast that he did, and I was super inspired. So basically, every chapter in this book breaks down a different limiting belief that he's had. And this man's broken all kinds of world records. Like he was the first guy to walk solely unassisted from one end of the Antarctic to the other. I mean, he's done all kinds of really insane, like mental, physical challenges. And so every chapter of the book breaks down a different limiting belief. And I was inspired to do the 12-hour walk. And basically, what I did one morning was I left my house. So I live on the side of a dormant volcano called Haleakala. And the idea is that you walk out your doorstep totally unplugged for 12 hours, because then every time it's like training the neural pathways in your brain that every time you leave your house you'll remember what's possible, right? So I
Mm.
left my house at 5:26. It was still dark. I took my cell phone, but it was in airplane mode just for my flashlight and in case of emergency. You just never know, right? But my idea was, it doesn't have to be a physical challenge even, but for me, I'm in pretty good shape right now. So I was like, when I look out my kitchen window, I can see the top of Haleakala. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to see if I can walk up the crater, see how far I can get in 12 hours. So 5:26, I leave my house. It's dark. The sun came up. It was so beautiful already. Like I walked for an hour and a half and I was already so blessed, like crying, walking, like, it's so beautiful here. Thank you, God, for this time, for this day. Like, show me your heart for me and what's happening. And it was such a beautiful day. Anyway, I made it all the way to the summit. And then my friend came and picked me up, thank God, because it was right at 12 hours and the sun was going down and it was really cold up there. But the big aha moment that super inspired me from that was, there's a part, I've drove that highway along a lot of the times, going to the summit and hiking in the crater, but I've never walked it. And there's a whole bunch of switchbacks on the way up. And there's probably 4 miles where you're completely in the clouds. And at this point, I'd been walking already for like, 7 hours, and I was doing a lot of stretch breaks. I basically walked a marathon up, because from my house, like the whole thing is up, right? And so I kept doing a lot of stretch breaks, and I couldn't see where I was walking. I was 4 miles in the clouds, and I felt like, again, God was just telling me, like, even when you can't see where you're going or where the next turn is, if you just keep taking baby steps, you're eventually going to reach your destination. And then before you know it, you're above the clouds. And do you know what? When the sun started
Mhm.
breaking through the clouds, what that did for my soul, I was like crying. Like, people think I'm crazy, I'm sure. Walking, stretching, crying. Oh, a lot going on with her. Halfway up
She's
the
a big,
crater by
she's
herself.
so but that's amazing
But
in the person when you shared that perspective of not seeing you, we don't see the end of our
yes,
story. We
yes,
don't see that final destination, but we're trusting that if we take, like you said, one foot in front of the other, eventually you're going to get to that top and see, oh my gosh, you carried me this whole way through. How
hmm,
can I not trust you to keep carrying me through?
yeah. And then your path, you get above the clouds and your path becomes clear. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
again, apply that to anything in your life. Like, this is life.
Yeah.
We're all going to go through those seasons where we feel like we're walking through the clouds and we don't know what's next. But if you just keep making those baby steps forward, I promise you, you're going to get above the clouds and it's going to be clear and you'll have peace. And there's peace there, right?
Mm.
There's some peace there. There's some healing there. I think some things we won't ever fully heal from on this life. Like, I actually really believe I won't ever fully heal from losing my son until I see him again. Um, but there is some healing. There is
Mhm.
healing and there is some peace.
Yeah. But it does take a little bit of our willingness to put one foot in front of the other, even if
Yep.
we can't see 5 feet in front of us.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yep. Exactly.
So good. Well, we'll link to that book as well as your book in the show
Okay.
notes because that's really inspiring. I know you challenged me to it. I'm like, oh, I got to think about that. But you always
Well,
you're good for challenging. I
well,
would try it.
and let's be honest, Susan Johnson, the 12-hour walk is a lot easier than 75 hard, which is
True.
75 days.
This is true. If I had to choose one or the other, I think I might go for the 12-hour walk.
Also, whoever's listening, if you don't know what 75 hard is, look that up. And then if you have to choose, you'll probably
You're going
choose
to
a
definitely choose
12-hour
the
walk.
12-hour walk. Let me just put it there.
True
Oh,
story.
well, I love you. Thank you so
I love
much for
you.
this time. And I think you should probably come on like every other week. Maybe we just do the
Okay.
Shauna and season show.
I love it. Let's do it. And I just want to say thank you so much for all you do. You're showing up all of the time. You're educating people on ways that they can support their bodies, their families' bodies going through cancer. I learned so much from you, and you also don't have to do what you're doing. It's a lot of giving, it's a lot of heartache. And so I just want you to know that you're so appreciated and loved from afar. And I'm so grateful for you and all that you do too. Thank you.
Thank you, friend. I sure do love
Yeah,
you.
love
Well,
you.
good seeing you. We'll talk
Good
soon.
seeing you. Okay.